Now, John has several different, 2 weeks ago we talked about John's idea of Messiah replacement motif, of Jesus the replacement. He replaces this and he replaces that and he replaces that. It's not his only motif. I mean, John has like a trial motif going on, whereas every one of the other Gospels has Jesus on trial. John's Gospel has you on trial. It's really kind of cool when you watch what John does, because right out of the gate, Jesus comes in going, I'm here to judge the world in righteousness, and I'm not going to judge them the way you expect. I'm here to be judged, and this is what you're going to do to me, and this is what you're going to do to me, and this is what, it's almost like they're on trial, and John goes, I'm a witness. This is what happened. So that's a pretty cool trick John uses. But something else John does is life and light. Everywhere you read in John, life and light, and he's bringing them together all the time. And so every time you see light springing up, you've got life attached to it. So wherever Jesus is dropping light, and we're going to see in a moment that he does it frequently, he's not just talking metaphorically, and he's not just being philosophical. It'd be nice, put a little light into your darkness. He literally starts putting light into darkened eyes and darkened hearts, and starts to give you the true to life idea of what it would mean to have light in the middle of your darkness. Where does John get this? I mean, John's there, so he's telling you what Jesus does, but how does he make these connections? So I want to show you some from the Old Testament, because that's where we begin to formulate what we know about the New Testament, is way back there in the Old. Look at Isaiah chapter 9, verses 1 and 2. Now this at first is going to seem completely out of context of talking about Jesus as light. That's why I wanted you to see verse 1 as well. It starts brightening up a little bit in 2. Nevertheless, the gloom will not be upon her who is distressed, as when at first he lightly esteemed the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, and afterward more heavily oppressed her by the way of the sea, beyond the Jordan and Galilee of the Gentiles. Okay, that's almost discouraging. Nothing there contextually makes any sense. There's a bunch of names and cities and locations, none of which matter to us as we're reading this. Even if we're in context, we're probably lost. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwelt in the land of the shadow of death, upon the great light has shined. You stop right there. You have this Old Testament text that seems throwing out a couple of locations and a bunch of different people, and this prophecy that those that are in darkness will see great light. And maybe you would just fly past this and end up in the New Testament and forget verses like this. But Matthew won't let you do that. And I use Matthew because he quotes that. We're going to watch John live it out, but we're going to watch Matthew write it down. Matthew 4, verse 12. When Jesus heard that John had been put in prison, this is John the Baptist, he departed to Galilee, and leaving Nazareth, he came and dwelt in Capernaum, which is by the sea, in the regions of Zebulun and Naphtali, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by Isaiah the prophet, saying, the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, by the way of the sea, beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles. The people who sat in darkness have a great light, and upon those who sat in the region of the shadow of death, light has dawned. Did you see what Matthew does? Matthew takes Jesus from Nazareth and parks him in Capernaum, which is near the Sea of Galilee, where a bunch of Gentiles live, in the land of Zebulun and Naphtali. Jesus intentionally goes to the land of Zebulun and Naphtali and stops at Capernaum and spends some time dealing with the Gentiles in Galilee. And it's not just that he's not just there to touch Gentiles. I mean, he's living in a land full of a bunch of Gentiles. And Matthew says, this is so the scripture can be fulfilled, that those who were in darkness have seen great light, and those who sat in the region of shadow of death, light has dawned. And so Matthew takes this prophecy of Isaiah and says, I remember a time when Jesus intentionally came out of Nazareth, and we went to Naphtali and Zebulun, and we parked ourselves in Capernaum, and a bunch of Gentiles came to him. And maybe Matthew got it because maybe Jesus quoted it that day and said, hey, I'm here, so that people who live in great darkness can have great light shining into them. And I think this connection is so awesome because it's taking a darkness scripture of the Old Testament and it's injecting the light of who Jesus is. Here's more. Isaiah chapter 42, verse 6. Watch this one. I, the Lord, have called you in righteousness and will hold your hand. I like that. The U is capital. The Y on the word you is capitalized. This is a New King James Version trick. It makes proper pronouns that are not necessarily proper. It does that because of the Greek inflection, or the Hebrew inflection in this case, probably Greek out of the Septuagint. But the point is, I've called you, capital Y, because prophetically we're talking about the Son of God. So we're talking about Jesus. I've called you in righteousness and hold your hand. This is that tender father and son intimacy. This is the father saying, I'm going to hold your hand, son. I will keep you and give you as a covenant to the people, as a light to the Gentiles. And what will you do? You will open blind eyes, bring out prisoners from prison, and those who sit in darkness from the prison house. Guys, I mean, this is a preaching passage. God holds Jesus' hand and says, I will give you as a covenant to the people. See, because before, my covenant with the people has always been, my Mosaic covenant with the people has been sacrifice a bunch of lambs, and then you do good and I'll bless you, and you do bad and I'll curse you. And that's the deal that I've worked with my people. But son, I'm going to hold your hand through your earthly experience. And then when we're done, I'm going to give you as a covenant to the people, so that if the people will look to you, they'll know that you and I have a relationship, and they can enter into that hand-holding relationship with you and I. You will be my gift to them. This I will give you as a covenant to the peoples is off the charts. Awesome. I can't do it justice. I mean, God holds the hand of his son through his earthly ministry like a dad holds his little kid's hand to protect him and to hold on to him. And then he takes that hand off and he puts him out there in front of us. And he says to us, to all of us who are blind and prisoners and in darkness, and he says, here, I give him to you as a covenant. If you take him, you take me. If you love him, you love me. And so for Isaiah, darkness is blindness and prison. For Isaiah, for darkness to be blindness and prison, and for Jesus to be the offering of covenant, but here, take him. Jesus has to go to work doing what no prophet has ever done in the history of the world. I'm getting ahead of myself, but it's necessary. You have to do this sometimes when you study books, and you're going to be weeks or months getting to the passage you need. And this, I'm off book here for a moment, but we got to cover this. Jesus stands up on a Saturday in the synagogue and he unfolds the 61st chapter of Isaiah, and he says, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, for he hath anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor and recover of sight to the blind. And when you go read that in Isaiah 61, it never says recover sight to the blind. Jesus adds that. It's not in the Old Testament. And I read that for a long time and thought, what gave him the right? Well, now he gets the right because he's the author, but that didn't fly with people standing there. And he can't just say, I'm going to recover sight to the blind. First of all, you better do it. I mean, because that's pretty big. Because, his next statement is, today is the scripture fulfilled in your ears. So that's pretty big. But also, where do you get the right to go, I'm anointed, I'm going to recover sight to the blind? Nobody's ever made a blind man see in the Old Testament. There's not one healing in the Old Testament of a blind man being made to see. It's the ultimate miracle because it's metaphorical. If you're blind, you're in chaos. You're in darkness. Your eyes are open, but they don't work. It's the ultimate insult. It's representative of the greatest curse you could have. And no one makes blind people see because only God has the power to give light into darkness. So Jesus comes along and says, I'm going to make blind people see. And he literally makes blind people see, but he spiritually makes blind people see. They're in a prison and in a darkness, and they're encaged. And so John is going to show you the Jesus who turns blind eyes into sight, gives them strength. Gosh, I could be there all day. I will give you as a covenant.